Episode 131 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is an episode especially for my Russian-speaking followers, fans, etc. But before we start, little funny story to tell you. Just a little anecdote. Sometimes we need a bit of humour to lighten the mood in these troubled times, shall we say, that we're going through. So, funny story. See this guy here. Take a good look at him, okay? This gentleman's name is, he is known as Arthur Bear, okay? He is actually my son's favourite teddy bear, one of his favourite teddy bears. Now, why do I say this? The other day, I was just browsing through comments I'd received on various episodes of the YouTube channel. I was at work. It was all in English. Had nothing better to do, really. So I'm browsing through them. And I see a comment has arrived for one of the previous Russian language episodes I did. To be exact, it was episode, I think it was 124. And it was Kyrgyzstan. It was an episode I did, if you recall, Kyrgyzstan presentation at the Committee Against Torture. And, well, I saw that there was a comment from one Arthur Beard. Okay, his surname spelled B-E-A-R-D. And I looked at it and I thought, that's very strange. I thought, are my kids taking the piss? I thought, little bastards, I thought, they're taking the piss, aren't they? And then so I opened up the comment, and then I started reading it. And it's a really nice comment, actually. Hello, thank you so much for these videos. This is a fantastic one. For должностные преступления, I'm wondering whether crimes committed by public officials or something along those lines would perhaps be clearer. I was a bit confused by administrative crimes at first because I first thought of the administrative versus criminal offence dichotomy, which also comes up quite often. And then so I was reading that and I realised that, well, my kids certainly wouldn't be aware of what должностные преступления is in Russian, and I don't imagine they've quite got the point where they know either to know what is or to be able to spell a dichotomy. So then I realised that the actual comment was genuine, and Arthur, I just want to say big thank you to you. It's comments like that give you the motivation to keep making episodes. And actually, Arthur raises a very good point. Okay, when he talks about должностные преступления in that episode, with the link to which I'm going to leave you up there, by the way, so you can go and watch that episode. There's a lot of interesting vocabulary there to do with criminal justice and so on, torture, obviously. And so I think the solution I gave you in that video was just administrative crimes, similar to the Russian, должностные преступления. But he got me wondering what Arthur said. So he said, crimes committed by public officials. So I went to multitran.ru, and sure enough, that's there. The only thing for us interpreters is it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Crimes committed by public officials. And then I saw other solutions that they gave there, including malfeasance. So I thought that. They also said white-collar crime. I think white-collar crime is maybe a bit too much of a generalization to use in those circumstances. But I think maybe malfeasance is a really good solution, and it's just one word, which is really the ideal for us. So, Arthur, I forgive you for thinking that you were trying to deceive me, old man. You're done for now. See you later. Okay, so let's get down to the subject matter of today's episode, and this is we're going to be using a statement that was delivered by Russia earlier this week, 2 or 3 days ago. It's the Human Rights Council kicked off again in Geneva, kicked off on Monday. I actually opened the Human Rights Council. Yes, I did. The president of the Human Rights Council is Argentinian, and he speaks Spanish. And so when they opened it, the 50th session, no less, big jubilee session, you might say, number 50. And I was interpreting him opening it. What an honor, eh? What an honor. Okay, and so, but anyway, this meeting, I wasn't actually there for this Russian statement. It was on the situation in Ukraine. Anyway, it's got a lot of useful vocabulary, and it's, as I say, it's really good to keep up to speed with what they are saying on the subject, because the subject is obviously getting discussed all over the place. So and it's got some really interesting word choices, and structures as well, which would be very tough to do if you're interpreting and if you didn't have the text. Now, they did provide the text, fortunately, for my colleague who had to interpret it, but it's always good to practice these things without the text. So as per usual, I'll be leaving the links to the original audio and to the transcript in the description box down below. And without further ado, let's get started on the text. And by the way, at the end, I'll be doing a quick run through, quick site translation, sort of to reproduce a little bit booth conditions. Okay, so here we have the text up on the screen for you, and I have marked it, and you're wondering why I've marked it in two different colors. The way I'm going to approach it, so the words I've underlined in blue as we go through this, it's more just like for like vocabulary solutions that I'll be giving you. Those words, those phrases that I've underlined in red are the more complex constructions that you really need to approach very carefully, but very skillfully. And you have to really think a bit on the fly as you're coming. And, it's these sort of big compound noun, adjective, whatever, verb constructions. It's the kind of constructions that I go into a lot of detail in previous episodes. If you recall, prying apart JB's butt clenchers, I think I rather artistically called the episode. I made two of them, actually. And I go into a lot of detail as to different approaches that you can adopt when trying to render these constructions, while keeping more or less with the speaker, not having to wait till the end of a sentence in Russian to then basically tag on a whole string of words in English in the end and thereby miss the start of the next sentence. But that's why I've underlined some in red and some in blue. And I think perhaps we'll just actually start. We're going to maybe go through the ones in red first, okay? Because they're the really interesting bits. And so I want to look at, solutions that you would perhaps provide on the fly in the heat of the moment when, you don't have the time really to think about anything really fancy and artistic, but also to think, now that we're with the benefit, with the benefit of hindsight, and then we're just sitting here calmly, no one's rushing us. What is the best way that perhaps we could render these expressions and phrases in the almost certain event that you run into them again in future? And you will know, maybe you hear it and you'll think, oh, hang on, did we not discuss this expression back in the interpretation station? And maybe that expression we think about today, maybe it will come to you. Maybe it won't. Maybe you just have to think again in the moment. But maybe the time after that, when it will inevitably come round again, maybe you'll get it. So it's always good. I stress this a lot. It's always good to have these expressions turning over in your mind, just to give you sort of food for thought. So let's have a look. The first red thing I've underlined here. Для достижения своих геополитических целей они не гнушаются ничем. Okay, well, let's have a look at this. Они не гнушаются ничем. To achieve their geopolitical goals, Okay, now what is now nie gnuszająca? So gnuszаться is like to be, to be a bit disgusted by. Okay, so to be honest, I mean, I've come across this expression quite a lot, and the first thing that comes to me is the word qualms. They have no qualms. Here, perhaps you could just say, to achieve their geopolitical goals, they have no qualms. Full stop. All right. Other alternatives might be they will stop at nothing, or they will stoop to any level. Another idea might be, okay, this same idea that they're shameless. Okay. It's actually a bit similar to the next this little bit here, беззазрение совести. Okay, it's a similar idea. Again, this whole idea is that shamelessly, Now, what was interesting for me here is this беззазрение совести. Use the word совесть, like conscience. What do we say in English? What expression do we have in English that if you really want to convey that idea of conscience? And I was thinking, we talk about in English a prick of conscience, your conscience pricking you. Okay, perhaps we would say without a prick of conscience, беззазрение совести. What do you think about that? Oh, again, you could say maybe shamelessly. I mean, you could perfectly legitimately say to achieve their geopolitical goals, they have no qualms. Shamelessly, they занимаются массовой дезинформацией. Shamelessly, now занимаются can sometimes be deceptively tricky word to render into English, because you think to yourself, in English we don't tend to say it that way, we tend when they do mass disinformation, we tend to have a different verb. We tend to throw in a word they peddle mass disinformation. A simpler word though that I think works very well here for занимаются, that when you're talking about something abstract, is perhaps to engage in. So shamelessly they engage in mass disinformation. Okay, I think that works quite well for abstract concepts. Okay, they engage in spying, to engage in propaganda and so on. So I think that's quite a good word for занимаются. Often, not always, but I think often it works well. Okay, now this next red section here. Манипулирующие информационным пространством американцы. Видимо, манипулирующие информационным пространством американцы европейцы считают. So, I mean, literally it would be, this is the adjective is basically all of this, isn't it? Oops. That line wasn't meant to go there. Okay, it's the манипулирующие is up to пространством, the manipulating information space Americans and Europeans. In English we'd probably say the Americans, Europeans who have been manipulating the information space. But again, if you leave that adjective till here, you might lose the next bit of the Russian. Считаю, что можно забыть зверство Запада. So maybe here you could just say clearly, manipulating the information space. It's like a subclause, okay? The Americans and Europeans think that it's possible to forget, etc., etc. So that would be my reaction. I would just turn that into a sort of, a subclause. That way, as I say, it gets all those words out of the way, the манипулирующие, the информационным, and the пространством, and then you just carry on. The Americans and Europeans think that it's possible to forget the atrocities of the West, etc., etc. Okay, so let's move on to the next red line down here. Особым цинизмом отличалась бомбардировка Югославии. Okay, so again, in English, perhaps, a speaker here, the most natural way to say that in English might be the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999 really stood out for its cynicism, is perhaps the most natural way a native English speaker might express that idea. But obviously, again, we're hearing first, the start of the sentence is coming, особым цинизм отличалась. We might say, for example, particularly cynical was the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. And that, to me, it sounds, pretty good English, okay? So again, when something, it's hard with the отличалась to always convey that connotation. I don't think you always have to. I think just by saying it alone, particularly cynical was the bombing of Yugoslavia, I think gives enough stress to the idea anyway. Or maybe you've already just dived in, you've said particular cynicism. Now, how are you going to finish that sentence with it and making sure that it stays smooth? Maybe you just say particular cynicism surrounded the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. Again, it's very important to just try and think on your feet. And here's another example. Поддержание европейцами операции США по демократизации Афганистана. My inclination when hearing again, here you could say, if you've had the benefit of all the time and, you're not under any pressure, you would probably say the US operation supported by the Europeans to democratize Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. But again, if you're under pressure and you're just hearing that come at you, you want to process that поддержание европейцами. You might, for example, say, I think when I listened through it, I says what came to me was the support from the Europeans to the US operation to democratize Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, led to blah, blah, blah. So again, I'm turning that поддержание, which is an adjective there, I'm making it into a noun. And that is a technique, as I say, that I go into in some detail for these kinds of constructions in those prying apart the butt clenches. When you have those expressions like the приняты в 2020 году, принятый в 2000 году договор, okay. So I'll say like the adoption in 2020 of the treaty. I'll term the принятый as from an adjective in the Russian, and I'll convert it into English, converting it into a noun. So I would maybe say the support from the Europeans to the US operation, etc., etc. Let's go to the next page. I've got some more here. So there we go again. Не гнушаются again. It's again a tricky sentence, similar democratizing experiments by the countries of the collective West не гнушаются проводить в других регионах. It would be very difficult, just the way the sentence is structured in English, to really go word for word here. So it occurs to me here, maybe you would just say, were carried out in other regions shamelessly. You would turn the не гнушаются, you would turn it into an adverb. Seems to me the most. Or again, you could say similar democratizing experiments by the countries of the collective West, without any qualms, were carried out in other regions. That's another way you could actually do that. So you just sort of create a little subclause. You sort of separate it from the rest of the sentence. It's not the end of the world, if you don't manage to convey it. If you're under a lot of pressure, the important, the meat of that sentence is these experiments were also carried out in other regions. That's crucial that you convey. The nie gnuszаются, it's a bit of a value judgment on the part of the speaker. So it's nice to be able to convey it. probably won't get stopped if you don't, but I don't know. You know what it's like sometimes with the Russian minions sitting behind the ambassador. They can be a bit intimidating. So maybe, as I say, shamelessly, without qualms. Сейчас всплывает много данных. Okay. I was thinking about this. A lot of data, a lot of information is coming to the surface. Is I think word for word perhaps the best solution here. But again, if you're suddenly hearing this just in the heat of the moment, what you need a word. You're going to be lucky if that expression comes to you in the moment, comes to the surface. So what's another more straightforward alternative for that? And I would say it's emerge, okay? Now, there's been the emergence of a lot of data, etc., которые свидетельствует. Or even more simply than that, now a lot of data has appeared, okay? Sometimes you just can't, sometimes it's impossible to match the nuance in the original when you're interpreting into English. But again, in future, if you run across this sort of expression, сейчас всплывают данные, you'll remember the interpretation station talked about coming to the surface. But as I say, emergence, and we talk about this as well, where you play safe when you have these expressions, these sentences in Russian which start with the verb, and they can be very hard because obviously in English is structured around subject, verb, object, isn't it? You like to know immediately who is the star of the sentence, okay? You don't get that always in Russian, and so to make up for that, you need to often a technique that you can adopt to keep the English sentence flowing is to throw in a there is, okay, there, and with a noun. There's been the emergence. There's been the you can say the appearance of a lot of data. I think the emergence is, but there has been the emergence of a lot of data is perhaps the best solution. And again here, okay, a new sentence, and immediately it launches in with вскрываются и элементы личной выгоды. Upon thinking about this, perhaps the best word we're looking for here is revelations. There have been revelations of elements of personal gain, benefit, as well. That really gets across the meaning of that вскрываются. I think there have been revelations of elements of personal gain. But again, what if revelations doesn't come to you in the moment? Sometimes you just have to play completely safe. If nothing better comes to mind, just say there have been elements of personal gain. We've seen elements of personal gain. I mean, as interpreters, what's the baseline, for us? I think the most basic thing is just to survive when you're doing a statement. And the best way of surviving is if nothing else comes to mind, what you do say, at least it just should sound normal in English. So if you were to say here, we've seen elements of personal gain, you're probably going to be all right. The minion's probably not going to stop you. So there's a lot of different levels. Maybe you get the best answer of all, the best solution of all. Maybe you get just a sort of neutral answer, which does the job nicely, and then the very sort of lowest acceptable solution is the one where you miss the word, you don't quite get it, but what you've put in its place is so neutral that you get given the benefit of the doubt, basically, and you hope that the rest of your performance will compensate for the occasional missed word here and there. And here's the final one in red. Прогнозируемый Западом глобальный продовольственный и энергетический кризисы. Again, here my inclination was to turn прогнозируемый, which again an adjective here. The whole thing would go with the forecast by the West global food and energy crisis. So I would probably say the forecast by, I would turn prognoserium into a noun, the forecast by the West, but the of here, of the global food and energy crisis, are a consequence, etc., etc. So again, when you hear this sort of prognoserium, what is it? It's a present participle, actually, right? Acting as an adjective. Again, my inclination would be to turn that into a noun. So the forecast by the West of global food and energy crisis, etc. Okay, so those are the butt clenchers, if you like. Now, let's have a look now at some of the more straightforward linguistic solutions for these interesting vocabulary that appears here. Now, this first one, okay, воспользоваться правом на ответ. This is a classic UN thing to say, and probably in other international organizations as well. Okay, this is all to do with the right to reply. If a delegation says nasty things about basically another delegation, that the victim will then come back and ask the president or the chairman to be able to exercise his right of reply. It's a very important, just a little package to note at the UN and probably everywhere else as well, when in these kinds of meetings, summits, whatever. So we are forced to exercise our right of reply. Just remember that as a package, to exercise the right of reply. Еще раз подтверждает. This could just be synthesized into one word, just reiterates the complete lack of wish, of desire. Okay, 3 words in Russian, but I think that in English could just be boiled down to reiterates. Неприкрытое давление, overt pressure, blatant pressure on sovereign states. Зажимают права и свободы. Again, a good. I guess the idea is that they're really putting pressure. They're impinging on their rights and freedoms in a vice, right? That's the idea of the zajim, isn't it? Closing in. So I think a good word here would be to impinge on their rights and freedoms. Растаптывают декларируемые ими же принципы. So a couple of things here. What are they doing to their declared principles? They're trampling over them. They are for a longer sort of idiom that we might use. We talk about, riding roughshod over something. Ride roughshod over their declared principles. Again, I think here it would be easier to say растаптывают. For some reason, when I hear that растаптывают, the tap, okay, makes me think of it's like, I don't know, there's similar letters, right, with trample, and it's the idea of just sort of trampling on something. As I say, you're going to hear to ride roughshod over, certainly coming from English. So just be aware, make sure you recognize that coming from into English into Russian. Same meaning. You can also say flouting, actually. Flouting their declared principles. Zверство Запада. So this is a word that I will almost always render as atrocities, okay, to forget the atrocities of the West. Now this word here, возомнившим себе, I must admit, I don't know if I've ever come across that word before. And now, under those circumstances, you say maybe, okay, Roland, what would you say? Okay, you've never come across it. What would you say if then? I'd probably say I would like to remind these, I would probably say something like self-declared peace-loving paragons of democracy, is probably what I would say. I would have understood that they were based, that's what they think of themselves. Sometimes we say also in English, I would like to remind these self-styled peace-loving paragons of democracy. Although obviously I'm looking at multi-tran here, and I see that the idea is возомнивший себя is to do with, arrogant, cocky. That's a good quick word, all right. Big-headed, maybe arrogant would perhaps be best, but yeah, this is something we often talk about. Self-styled. When you talk about in English people being these self-styled. When you talk about a person being a self-styled military expert, for example, the idea is that it's only the person in question that thinks of himself as that. Other people tend to think maybe otherwise. So yeah, you got a few choices there for возомнивший себя, arrogant, self-styled, etc. And this is an interesting word. I was quite pleased with what I did here. This étalon. So I know it like an étalon is like usually like a standard. Okay, but I think here like a paragon of democracy, I think, is the best solution here. That's a really good word in English. Okay, these peace-loving paragons of democracy. This is a typical thing I think the Russians would say about the West as being basically how they're all talk. That's the accusation that they say that they're these paragons of whatever democracy, paragon of virtue. There's a typical English idiom that we talk about. He's always making himself out to be such a paragon of virtue. Okay, 1000 японцев погибших только в первой. So a good word if you want. Okay, who died? You can say who just died in the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you want a bit more nuance, though, a bit more emphasis, maybe who perished. It's a bit more a slightly higher register. Okay. Then I noticed this is an expression they use quite a bit in Russian, isn't it? Ни в чем не повинных мирных женщин и детей. I think I would just say, I think you could just say innocent. I don't think you need to render the ни в чем не. I guess you could say completely innocent women and children. Comes down here as well. Ни в чем не повинных людей, again. Innocent, completely innocent. Государственности. So this is a word I know that is used a lot by the Russians, especially with respect to the situation in Ukraine. I know there was a previous episode I did, Putin's statement, I think, to the nation just before things started in February, talking about государственности of Ukraine. So statehood, I think you just go with statehood, destroying these countries' statehood. Syria устояла, Syria resisted, or Syria held out. And then on the second page, okay, this is an important little phrase to be comfortable with and to immediately have a response. I think pod predlogom, under the guise of, on the pretext of, under the banner of. There, I've given you three alternatives just like that. Then wyжигали людей белым фосфором. They set people alight with white phosphorus. Because they scorched people with white phosphorus. Скоплением гражданских лиц. So this is talking about, these attacks on gatherings of civilians for скопление. I had to think about that, I think when I was just doing it to myself the first time, I thought groups, the only thing that came to mind was groups of civilians. I think the best solution here, gatherings of civilians. Разжигание, so a couple of similar words here with similar meaning. Разжигать вооруженный конфликт и развернуть русофобия. It's a similar idea, similar concept. So I think with an armed conflict, maybe we ignite. Okay, they are guilty of igniting an armed conflict. And here, what do they do with the Russophobia? I think they unleashed it. So I know with armies, with развернуть, you deploy them, but with, again, an abstract notion like, I don't know, Russophobia, I think maybe you would unleash Russophobia. This is, again, свидетельствуют не просто о продуманной геополитической игре. Attest to, not just a deliberate geopolitical game. To bear witness, they bear witness just to it, not just to a deliberate, intentional geopolitical game. This is an interesting word here. Европейцы же в своем желании выслужиться перед заокеанским старшим братом. Now, again, this is tricky to get the best word in the moment. I think the sort of safest word, the most neutral word to go for is maybe to help, in their wish to help out their overseas older brother. But I think, again, vysluzhitsa carries a slightly stronger connotation than just helping, and there's something quite pejorative, I think, in the way that the Russians are expressing this, in their wish to curry favor with, to toady up to. That's really, those images are quite a lot more sinister than just merely helping out. But again, if they don't come to you in the moment, then, help out more or less gets the job done, okay? They've скатились к безудержной Russophobia. They've resorted to frenzied Russophobia, relentless Russophobia. The inclination is, perhaps you hear the безудержной, and there's an inclination in English to you want to find a word with less in it, okay? Or that bears, so I'm saying a relentless, uncontrolled Russophobia. But don't always, sometimes there are other words that you can use that don't use the less or the frenzied Russophobia. I think maybe, I would even maybe say they resorted to full-on Russophobia. Again, a couple of more ideas for you. Необдуманные действия Евросоюза here. When I hear that, again, this is similar to продуманные or необдуманные. This is, often I'll think of, let's talk about these half-baked ideas. I don't know if it works quite so well in this situation as a consequence of the half-baked actions. I think in this instance, something a better alternative might be. I was going to say a good alternative might be ill-advised or rash. But then I've cheated again, so I looked at multi-tran. Reckless, I like that actually. The reckless actions of the EU. So I think my initial one would have maybe been ill-advised, but reckless. That's a good word, reckless. And they use that again. This is an adjective or an image that they will conjure up a lot, the Russians, when talking about actions of the EU and the US in Ukraine. And then this final sentence, мыслящим людям. Okay, I think you'd be all right to say thinking people. However, all thinking people have long understood this. It's not great. I was thinking maybe in English, we would probably say anyone sane, okay? Anyone, we'd probably even say, anyone with an ounce of common sense. Again, to say that in the moment, you're going to be hard pushed to come up with that on the spot, aren't you? But there you go. For you, certainly for you, Russian A's, English B's, that's what we say in English, isn't it? Anyone with an ounce of common sense could have told you that long ago. Okay. So let's finish. I'll do a quick read through. I'll do a quick site translation. put myself on the spot a little bit, see if I can come up with anything new and interesting as I'm going through it. Okay. President, we have been forced to exercise the right of reply following the statements by the delegations of the EU, the US, and a number of other countries. This discussion reiterates the complete lack of desire among the countries of the collective West to conduct mutually respectful dialogue with other states. To attain their geopolitical goals, they have no qualms. They shamelessly engage in mass disinformation. They exert overt pressure on sovereign states. They infringe rights and freedoms. They flout their own stated principles. When it comes to their own actions, they are blind and deaf. It's obviously manipulating the information space. The Americans and the Europeans think that it's possible to forget the atrocities of the West perpetrated by them in recent years and decades. We would like to point out to the self-styled peace-loving paragons of democracy, the USA, about the 200,000 Japanese who perished in just the first few months after the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. No one has forgotten the war crimes by the US during the Korean and Vietnam wars, when American troops shot and raped completely innocent women and children. Particularly cynical was the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. As a result of a joint operation by NATO countries, they killed 200 civilians in that country. The support by the Europeans to the US operation to democratize Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya led to the destruction in those countries of statehood, to complete chaos and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Syria held out, but at the price of huge loss of life and destruction of infrastructure. Under the guise of countering terrorism, US troops and their allies set fire to people with white phosphorus. They inflicted mass airstrikes on gatherings of civilians, and they tortured people in the prisons of Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. Similar democratization experiments by countries of the collective West are shamelessly carried out in other regions. It was the West that was guilty of igniting in 2014 the armed conflict in Ukraine, in unleashing the Russophobia there, in reviving Ukrainian Nazism, together with Hitlerism, one of the most horrific phenomena known to humankind. There has been the emergence of a lot of data attesting to not just a deliberate geopolitical game to convert Ukraine into an anti-Russia. There have been revelations of elements of personal gain. The Biden family had major financial interests in that country, developing a network of biolabs. The Americans pursued naturally not just and not so much commercial goals. The Europeans, in their desire to cozy up to, or to score points with their transatlantic older brother, resorted to frenzied Russophobia and completely unlawful sanctioned policies which violate the rights of the citizens of many countries, including the Europeans themselves. The forecast by the West of global food and energy crises are a consequence of the reckless action of the EU, the US, and their satellites. It's true they have unsuccessfully tried to hide their mistakes, laying the blame inter alia on our country. However, anyone in their right mind realized this long ago. Okay, so I played around a bit with a few things there. Anyone in their right mind came to me in the moment. Nanosili Masovia Udari inflicted, remember that word, inflicted strikes. I threw in air strikes because I got a feeling he was referring to, I think there was like, was it Assange, WikiLeaks that uncovered those attacks that they were carrying out on groups of journalists from helicopters. So I don't know. I think that's what the reference is to. I thought it flowed more than just inflicting strikes. I don't know, but inflicting air strikes. Maybe I shouldn't have taken that leap. It's a bit of a leap, but anyway. Okay, guys. I hope that I hope you found this lesson, this episode today useful. I hope that you have learned some new words. There's a lot of good stuff in this text, actually. That's a really good one, both in terms of learning new words, new solutions, and for practicing your techniques for seamlessly trying to transpose Russian constructions into English without getting lost, without having to reverse back, without having to, try and remember big chunks of words to tag on at the end. Again, it's one of the keys with interpreting from Russian into English skillfully is that ability to keep turning those out, making those adjectives nouns, etc., turning verbs into adjectives, whatever, you know what I mean. Okay, so if you have enjoyed the episode, please do click the like button, please do subscribe, share with your colleagues. Links to the transcript and to the audio will be, you can find that in the description box. And all that remains to be said is that, what is it? 131, did I say? Episode 131 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.